Okay. All right. Should be recording now. So we'll dive right into collection views. So before I start, does anyone know what a collection view is? You've probably seen it every day on the apps that you've used on your phones. It's a it's a different way to display data. So most of what you guys have been working on right now have been mostly table views or just free views where you drag labels and other components onto the screen. So collection views are just another way of displaying that data in tiles that flow on the screen. So it's similar to table views in the sense that you have data source objects that drive how many sections and rows of information are displayed, and you have similar delegate methods. So in table views, if you remember, you have cell for row at. So here you have something similar to that as well to um, basically design the collection views that you have displayed. So, examples. All of these things that you see on the screen right here are driven by collection views. So they're basically just tiles. So collection views, they allow you to go either horizontally or vertically or both. So if you look at this Netflix example, you'll notice that if you ever use the Netflix mobile app, you'll notice that most of those tiles, they go horizontally. Um, and same with the App Store. So all of those are horizontal collection views, but um, you can have both horizontal and vertical. So, um, like what I said before, it's really similar to UI table views. You have similar delegate methods too. So the two main delegates that come with the UI collection view data source protocol are collection view number of items and sections. So this basically drives how many items you have per section. So kind of similar to table view sections as well. And you also have collection view cell for item at. So that's pretty much what you have for table views in the sense of cell for row at. That would be um, similar to that. And it basically tells you how to render every single table view cell that you have. Alright, collection view cells. So each item is rendered as a UI collection view cell, and like the table view, everything was rendered as a UI table view cell. And the main difference between collection views versus table view cells is that with table view cells, you had sort of generic components. You had basic, right detail, left detail. You don't really have that with the UI collection view cells. So you basically need a custom one for every single one of these UI collection view cells, which if you want just a label, you can drag a label into this view that I'll show you guys later. There's also two different kinds of background views that render when a cell is selected and not selected. So the two states of your collection view cell, you have an is selected and an is highlighted. So is selected basically just shows you in code which one the user actually clicked on, and is highlighted basically just shows which one is currently highlighted as well. All right. So one of the most important features of UI collection views is what's called these collection view layouts. So this basically tells the application how you want to render every single one of these cells. So it handles the size, the position, and also the state of every one of these items. So it contains a set of three different kinds of visual components. So you have the cell itself, and you also have these supplementary views. So supplementary views are mainly the header and footers of your sections, and then you also have decorative views. They're kind of less used. I've used primarily cells and supplementary views. Decorative views are mostly to make your collection views look a little nicer, like this. So this is an example of a UI collection view, and you'll notice that the cells are all these different tiles within your collection view. And then you have these sort of supplementary views. So this looks a lot nicer than anything that I've created before, but your supplementary views basically denote your footers or headers. So it looks like this one only has footers, which you can mark there. And then the decoration view would be the styling that you see in the background of this view. So in terms of collection views, we'll be focusing mainly on flow layouts. So this is going to be your typical basic layout that comes standard with most collection views in iOS. So it's basically just your generic standard grid system. Cells are lined up have the look and feel of rows and columns. So it starts on the left, goes right, and then once it overflows, it continues on the left side and then continues from there. And this is where you can specify that scroll direction I was telling you guys about. So Netflix, obviously, a lot of their components have left to right scrolling, but you can also indicate up and down scrolling as well. And then headers and footers can be added as supplementary views. So in the background, this is basically what the flow layout looks like. So like I said before, it starts in the left side and then basically rolls right until it runs out of space, and then it continues on to the next row, and then continues on until it runs out of cells to render. And then you have these supplementary views on the top and bottom of these sections. So this would be considered one section, and then you have your header and footer if you choose to display one. And then your scrolling direction. So this would denote a vertical scrolling direction. Cool. All right. So fun things. You can drive the size. Is that cut off? You can drive the sizes of every single one of these cells dynamically. So it's basically just denoted by size for item at index path. So when you render all of your cells, you'll run through. If you choose to dynamically generate the size of all of your cells, you can use this function and basically say, for this cell, I want it to be this size. And then you can get something fun like this. The next important concept that you have with collection view cells is this spacing. So when you generate your layout, you'll be able to specify these different components, such as minimal line spacing for section at index. So what this basically does is minimum line spacing will judge the distance between each row. So the smaller the value, the closer it is, the bigger the value, the farther apart it will be. And then you also have minimum inter-item spacing for section at index. So that's just another property that denotes how much spacing you want between the cells on a single row. So yeah, it just indicates the minimum distance. So you'll have different screen sizes too. Like iPads are obviously going to be a little bit bigger, and this will sort of adjust according to your screen size. Cool. So sort of shot a lot of information at you guys. Did you have any questions about what we went over in terms of spacing or delegate methods for the collection view? Perfect. The other thing that you'll have with collection views is this concept of section insets, and you can think of those as sort of gaps between how far, sort of like your margins for your collection view in general. So when you specify your inset, it'll look like this. So you have a UI edge inset make, and then you have top, left, bottom, right margins. So the bigger these values are, the more space there will be between like top, right, bottom, left. And it'll just make your collection view look a little nicer so that you have some sort of spacing between your actual components and the borders of your device screen. Cool. So, told you, short slideshow, and then we will jump into a live coding exercise. Nope, not that one. Stop this. All right. Make a new project. Alright, cool. And you guys have run through this process like a million times, right? So you guys maybe can guide me through it. We'll call this my collection view. And we'll just throw it onto top. Perfect. And this is purely for preference, but I usually move these files into their own folder called supporting files. And from the last time I was here, you have to just remember to go into your build settings and specify this as supporting files. Supporting files. Go into our storyboard. So when you're making a UI collection view collection view, there's two ways you can do it. So Xcode actually provides a way for you to create one that's built in with a controller. So if you drag this, delete this guy. So if you drag this collection view controller onto the screen, it'll actually provide everything for you. It's basically a collection view built into a view controller, but I tend to stay away from these because it makes it harder to manipulate sometimes, because this is basically your entire view. It has to be a collection view. So say you maybe wanted to put a button down here, it would be extremely difficult to do because the view is built into it. So what I usually tend to do is, get rid of this scene. I use just a regular view controller, and then I drag a collection view into it. So this is basically your simple collection view. And what this allows you to is, say later on you decide that you want a button on this screen, you can just drag this up and then put a button, and then drag it down here, and then it basically makes it really easy to manipulate this view, which you won't have if you drag in just a regular collection view controller. Cool. We'll go ahead and also make our margins real quick, or our constraints. All right, perfect. So the collection view will come with this built-in custom view. So I'm just going to drag this out to 150 by 150. This size actually doesn't matter. It's just a design that I'll take because you'll specify the item size in your code. Okay. All right, awesome. So the thing to remember, though, is you have to bring it into here. So do you guys remember the two delegate and data source things that you had to bring in for table views? So you'll have to bring them in here as well, except they'll be specified as UI collection view. So they'll bring in the UI collection view delegate, and you'll also bring in the UI collection view data source. Cool. And something you can do if you want to find out more about some of the elements is you can command click into these, and you'll notice all of these functions. So all of these functions are available to you when you bring in the delegate. So you have should highlight item at, should select item at, did select item at. So this is probably the most important. You'll notice they're optional, so you don't actually have to implement these. But this is basically how you interact with those UI collection view cell components. So we'll go into the other one just to take a look. So UI collection view data source. Now this is the one that actually has required. So anything without an optional you have to bring in. So you have to bring in this number of items in section, and you also have to bring in self for item at. And Xcode actually gives you a pretty useful warning here. So it says does not conform to protocol, so it's missing those two functions, and you can bring them in pretty easily by hitting fix. And two ways you can actually do this. I don't know if you guys have actually. So sometimes you'll see people bringing in your delegate and data source in the controller itself, and that would basically just hold these functions into your controller. Typically, you want to separate those two out just in terms of clarity. Both ways work, but it's kind of easier to read all of your delegate methods when they serve as extensions to the main controller. So you can keep all of your controller logic in here, and then all of your delegate methods in a different segment of your code. All right, cool. So we're going to pull these objects in real quick. So there's going to be a puppy thing with this collection view, just like last time. We need the puppy object as well. So we'll make this a struct real quick. Struct puppy object. And then this will be name, which is a string. let image, which will be a string, then let description, which will be a string. Okay, perfect. It's still failing because we have to fill in this code, but also bring in this. Do you guys understand that part? I'm just copy and pasting this so we don't have to go through the pain of typing all of this out again. So let me also bring in those assets real quick so we have them. So into collection views. I'll bring in these puppies into our project. All right, perfect. All right. So number of items in section. Do you guys remember what this method does? It shows you how many elements you have per section. So we will only have one section in this scenario, but it will basically be whatever the count of our puppy array is. So puppy dot count. Make sure to return that. And then at our cell for item at, we'll just leave this as a empty. Well, actually, let's fill this in real quick. So collection view dot DQ reusable cell with identifier. So we actually haven't named it yet, but we'll just call it my cell, and then index path. So let's go back into the storyboard. Make sure to name this my cell, and we'll also go ahead and create our custom collection view cell here. And it's going to be fairly simple. So we'll make a Cocoa Touch class, and then we'll specify collection view cell, and we'll just call this puppy collection view cell. Create. Good. And then we'll make sure to specify this in our cell, and we'll also remember we have to make this our view controller. Cool. Alright, so all that should be okay. Go here. Go into the puppy collection view cell that we just made. And I'll design this component real quick. So all this will be is alright. So we'll drag an image view into here, and we'll also have a label to distinguish the name of our puppies. Let's make this 100 by 100. Leave this here. And then we'll also drag a label in. Perfect. Add mission constraints. Alright. And then we'll just drag these two components into our custom cell. So we'll just call this image here, and then we'll call this puppy label. Perfect. Alright, so now that we have all that set up, we can go into our view controller. And here. Does anyone know what we need here? So have you guys made custom table view cells before? Maybe. Possibly. So, oh really? Okay, perfect. Well, you'll learn something new today. So when you're using the default table view cells, or, well, there's no default UI collection view cells, but whenever you make a custom cell component, you have to make sure here you have to cast it as your custom view, because right now it'll just use, it actually doesn't have anything because collection views don't. For table views, this is perfectly fine because if you're using a basic red detail, all of those are provided for you already. But in this circumstance, we have to cast this as our collection view cell that we just made. So we'll just call that, cast this cell to that, and this will allow us to access the components that are in there. Oops. Okay. So this will allow us to access those two outlets that we just made. So the label and the image. Call that image. Here. And this text will just be our cell for item, the index path within our structure that we just made. So puppy array index path dot row. This will give us the puppy at each of the indices for that. So whenever you render a collection view, it'll run through every count that you specify, and it'll supply a row, section and row. But right now we only have row. So we'll just pull the name off of that, and then we'll also pull the image. So have you guys done much with image views as well? Just creating images? Okay. So for image views, you want to set an image, and we'll create a new image view from this, or a new image, and edit it with the name of our image. So this will just be our puppy array index path dot row, and then dot image. So all these strings basically correspond with the image that we just brought in from into assets. So if we open up assets, all of these are technically puppy1.jpg, so all of these are JPEGs, and you have to make sure to denote the file format in your whenever you're making an image. So right now it's complaining to us that we need to return some sort of collection view. So we'll just return the cell that we made, and that should be happy. It's also optional, so this is pretty bad, but we'll use this for now, and then we'll come back and refactor it. Because if cell was nil, it would crash that. Expecting this to not work, but you guys can figure out why. So we miss an important step in the storyboard, but I'll show you guys that. So right now, so we missed two things actually. So have you guys ever gotten this error when you're making your applications? Designated entry point is not set. Mm-hmm. Exactly, it is missing the arrow. So if you ever see an error like that, make sure to click this. So what I did before is I deleted my view controller, and that got rid of the initial view controller. So when I brought it in, that doesn't come with the controller. So whichever controller is your initial starting point, you have to make sure to bring this arrow back. And if you don't see it anywhere on your storyboard, make sure to just click the controller that you want, and then click this guy, and that'll bring that arrow back in, designating the starting point of your application.
You said there were 3 errors. This is 1.
2 errors. So we got rid of one, and now we'll have another one. This isn't immediately clear as to what's wrong. So you have a blank screen right now. You hooked up everything. You created your custom collection view cell, and you hooked up the view controller. Everything seems to be hooked up correctly, but there's nothing showing up on the screen. Does anyone have any guesses as to what this might be? Has to do with the delegate and data source that we brought in. So when you bring in a UI collection view controller, it'll map those delegates and data sources for you. But since we brought in our own view controller and brought in a collection view, it doesn't have those references to the delegate and data source methods that we have. So this isn't terribly intuitive, but you have to control drag from this collection view that you brought into your view controller and drag it to this tiny little yellow circle. And this is where you have these different outlets, so data source and delegate. So if you ever see something like that, make sure that this is hooked up too. And if we run this now.
How do you remove one if you do it? Because I always did it through code.
Yeah, you can do it through code.
And so how do you remove one if you do it rather than here in the storyboard?
Yeah, absolutely. You just left click and you can remove it this way. And yeah, both ways work. You can add it through code or from the storyboard. And
I had never seen this before coming here. I'm like,
learn something new.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah. But these are all of our puppies. So you'll notice that it's flow layout. So 1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then so on and so forth. So this kind of looks a little bit ugly, right? So in our collection view, we just created something that's 150 by 150. We haven't actually designated some of our layout options. So if you don't specify a UI collection layout, it'll just default to the flow layout. But we'll go ahead and modify some of the properties on it. All right. So we'll specify that in our view did load. So we'll go ahead and create one of our layouts. So we can just do let layout equal to UI collection view layout. And then UI collection view flow layout. Yeah. And then here we can modify some of our properties that we designated initially. So do you guys remember what property that we need to set to change the sizes of those different cells? Go back to our keynote real quick. So we kind of want all of them to be the same size, so we won't do this kind of crazy dynamic cell sizes, but we'll access the properties. So you can use either this function, or you can specify on the layout the item size that you want. So we'll create a constant real quick. Let item size equal to, we'll just use the UI screen size dot main dot bounds dot width 5 by 2. It's 2. So this basically denotes that we want 2 of them to show up side by side, and we can specify that using the item size CG size. So we'll create a new CG size with width and height, and they'll just be this item size variable that we just made. And you can, if you don't think something looks completely right, you can modify these different variables. So if you want 3 to show up on one row, you can do divide by 3, and this is just some math that you can use to customize the way your collection view looks. So now that we have item size, we'll move on to our section inset. That section. Does anyone know what our section inset is? What's that? Yeah, exactly. So it's a padding that you give your UI collection view. So if we go back to our keynote, it basically denotes the padding that we have on the top, left, bottom, and right of our collection view control, or our collection view. So we'll actually pull the same exact thing. We won't make a variable for this, but we'll just do a UI edge inset make. UI edge inset make, and you'll notice that it fills in this top, left, bottom, and right for us. So we'll just specify we want a little bit of padding on the top, no padding on the left, do 10 points of padding on the top or bottom, and then we'll do 0 points on the right. Next we have our inter-item spacing. Nope, that's not it. So we'll go ahead and specify these two. So the minimum line spacing for section at index and also minimum inter-item spacing for section at index. All of these are functions. There's two ways that you can sort of modify these. You can either go through every single element, like these functions will denote, or you can specify this on the layout level. So we're going to specify all of these in our layout level. So it should just be dot minimum line spacing, and we also have layout dot minimum inter-item spacing. And we'll just make all these two real quick. Cool. Does all of this make sense so far, for the most part? Alright, so you'll notice that it looks exactly the same as what we had before. Does anyone have a guess as to why this might be? So in our code, we specified that we created a new layout with all these specifications. So item size, section inset, minimum line spacing, minimum inter-item spacing, but it doesn't seem like it's taken any effect on our collection view. In a way, so we created this brand new outlet layout, but we haven't actually used it. Just because you made a layout and the view did load doesn't mean you're actually using it. So we have to go into our storyboard and actually bring in our collection view. And then we'll bring in our my collection view. And then all you have to do here is my collection view dot add that layout. Yeah. Oh. So you specify the collection view that you're trying to change the layout of, dot collection view layout, and you just set that equal to the layout that you just made. And if we run this now, that worked. Looks like we have some weird constraint issues, but you'll notice that it looks a little bit nicer than what we had. So we have those spacing on the left and right. We also have top and bottom spacing, and also we have spacing between the cells on a row. So yeah, it looks a little better. We should probably change our constraints. So let's remove these real quick. Clear constraints. Interesting. Have you guys used a view hierarchy before to debug your UI issues? So if you click this right here, it looks like 3 windows. It'll actually show you all the components that you have. So it looks like our image view is actually kind of cool because you can shift and rotate. But you can kind of see that the image view is not terribly in line with our label. So let's go into our storyboard, try to change this. Oops. Okay. So specify this bottom space to contain. Horizontal. Oops. Specify this here.
Using your
Oh.
size constraints for image.
Yeah. What's this? Position view. Do you remember where those size constraints are?
Which one?
The size constraints?
So the way I've always kind of done it was dragging from the image to whatever I want it to relate to, and then modifying the constraint after it's created.
Okay.
So like I would always
Interesting.
end
I
up
remember.
selecting equal height, and then I'd go into the constraint and update it. For
Okay. Isn't there a way to select that in your? Oh yeah, right here. Um, there you go.
oh, there it is.
Width and height. So we want those to remain 100. Supposed to continue. Oops. Seems kind of off. So it's like. Nice. That is not what we want. But our puppies are a little bit stretched.
You can enforce aspect ratio. I don't know if that would work better.
I'm wondering if that would impact the item size though. Because the item size is specified within the code. So if we have an iPad, those images don't want to be constrained to 100. So let's get rid of those constraints real quick. Let's give this one more shot. Oops.
Now you guys know if you're feeling bad about auto constraints.
Yeah, don't worry.
I get everyone.
Hey, look, it's better. Magic. All right, so we have our beautiful collection view, and yeah, other than auto layout and constraints, do you guys have questions about collection views and whatnot?
So the size of the cell
Mhm.
is not.
It's not impacted by what you've designed in your storyboard. So you can
Okay.
actually change the size in your layout. So say you wanted maybe 3 per row. You can do that. And a lot of this is fine tuning based on what constraints you kind of want for your cell. So if you want 3 per row, it'll be adjusted based on your layout. So whatever you have in the storyboard doesn't impact anything. Cool. Well, I know you guys said you guys were masters at Segway, so we'll use one of the optional functions that comes with our delegate, so the digclicks. So right now, these are actually interactable components, but we're not listening to any of the digclicks, right? So what might be cool is if we could segue this to a new view controller that has maybe a description, because we do have description here in our object for these puppies. So we could have it segue to a completely new view controller that shows us more information about this. What's my first step? So I guess there's a few things that we could start off with, right? Maybe making the new view controller that we want to segue to might be a good first step. So let's go ahead. Make a new view controller, and we'll just throw image view. Do 75. Label. Um, have have you guys used these textiles before? So it usually comes with default, so it usually is a System 17, but something to keep in mind is these different textiles that you can use. So if you guys have ever used the accessibility settings in your phones, so just making the text size larger or smaller, if you set it to 17, those actually won't change. So if you use textile like Title 1 here, if someone who's maybe their eyes are a little worse for wear and they change the sizes to be bigger, this will actually adjust for you. So this is where these come in handy. We'll make this big, so this will just denote our puppy name, image view, and then we'll also make a text view for our description. Perfect. All right. So let's run this. And we'll go ahead and make our controller. So this is just going to be a regular view controller, and we can denote that here. And puppy detail view controller. And make sure that you hook it up here as well. So go into class, denote this as our puppy detail view controller. And then we'll bring in these UI components. Cool. All right. for these. Oh no. Okay. So, copy main label. Image. Copy image here. And then we'll also bring in our copy description text here. Perfect. This. All right, cool. So now that we have our new view, does anyone know how to actually hook up our segue to this new view? Yep, we actually do need a navigation controller for this so that we can go back. So navigation controller. And when you bring in a navigation controller, it'll usually bring in a default table view controller. So if you don't want that, just go in. I can click on this. Delete that guy. And we'll hook this up to our initial view controller. And we'll denote our collection view controller as our root view controller. Okay, perfect. Now we have navigation though, so how do we actually segue to this new view controller that we made? Kind of similar, right? To how we hooked up everything. Amanda, do you know? So, have you guys done any segues from table view cells to a different controller maybe, or a segue into something else? Yeah. So it's sort of a similar concept. So instead of that custom or that table view cell segueing to the view controller, you just segue from the custom UI collection view to your controller. So there's actually two ways you can do this. So you can either go from the storyboard cell to here, or you can actually go from this menu here. So I usually like going from here to our component because there's a chance that you'll hook something like different up. Like if you actually hit the image view, you might accidentally click on that. But if you go from this list view, it'll be a guarantee that you're hooking up the cell to your controller. So we'll just show that. Okay. Let's see what happens. So segues to a completely new view controller that we just made, but it is missing basically everything from our previous view, right? So do you guys remember what function allows us to transfer data between different view controllers in the segue?
It's really helpful me. So think about we're getting ready for a segue. There's a synonym for getting ready for it.
It's almost like you have to prepare. Yeah, so perform segue. Do you guys know what perform segue does? It's specifically for if you want to perform a segue from code. So when you control drag from here, it does that all in the storyboard. But say you had an instance where you might want to perform segue from code instead of clicking. So maybe you have some sort of condition on the click that maybe you want to perform segue to a different view controller versus another one. That's where you would do perform segue with identifier, and then each of these segues actually has this identifier that you probably want to specify. So we'll call this puppy detail segue. And this basically denotes the segue that we want to prepare to segue for. So update. All right, cool. So, also, do you guys know some of the shortcut keys for Xcode? So, say like you want to open a file and something like that. Do you guys know those hotkeys? They're extremely useful, especially when you're working on a project with hundreds and hundreds of files. So if you do a Command Shift O, it'll open up this Finder view and it'll allow you to look for those files. And then Command Shift F will allow you to search for different things. So say you want to search for Puppy object in your entire project, it'll go through all of your um, classes and files and search for those, which is pretty convenient. All right, so let's go into here. Are you dead?
No, I just checked it. Like, 'cause I do that in VS Code. I never tried it in Xcode. I'm like, is that a custom key binding? No,
No.
it's in the beginning.
Yeah, it's default. Most IDs, I guess, they use sort of similar key bindings. Yeah, but it's extremely useful.
Just figured before I'd ask, is that a custom key binding?
Nice. Yeah, it saves you a lot of time. I have a teammate who actually goes through every single file in the directory. So he doesn't remember file names, so he just goes through the directory, and they could be nested really deeply, so it's just this person just clicking all the way through until he finds a file. So, override.
Project I'm working on that's just not feasible.
Yep, I agree. It's not feasible for our project either. So you'll notice that we made that identifier, right? Do you guys remember what goes into prepare for segue? So it's really similar to the table view prepare for segue. You might have to check the identifier. So if segue.identify equal to our puppy. I usually just like copy and pasting from the storyboard just so that both of these, are guaranteed correct. So if it's our puppy detail segue, we can go ahead and create our destination. Destination equal to segue dot destination. All right, so similar to the concept of casting our collection view cell. So here you'll notice we're casting our cell as our puppy collection view cell. We have to do something similar here. So do you know what we might be casting the segue.destination to? So to help you guys out, this is a UI view controller. So it's just a regular UI view controller, and we want to cast this to something that we can actually use. Do you know what that might be? Because right now, if we just use this destination, we won't have these things that we just made, right? So we want to make sure to set these properties before we actually go into the segue. So if we were to just leave it as destination and do destination done, it's actually an error type. But, we actually won't have any properties. It's not full type. Oh. You don't want to do that.
Speaking of those,
Yeah. Command Z is very, very useful. Well, I guess it actually won't let you proceed past this point. But do you have an idea of what we might want to cast this to? We just made a new view controller, right?
so if we go back to the storyboard and we look at where that segue is pointing, so we get so it's just kind of leading you there.
Yep. I heard you say something. Yep, so that puppy detail view controller that we just made, that's what you want to cast your destination as. So um, we'll just cast it as our puppy detail view controller. And that should actually build just fine. So now that we have that, we'll be able to access those things that we just made in our detail view controller. We also want to grab our index, so that'll allow us to determine which puppy we actually want to display. So you can do that pretty easily by doing my collection view dot index path for sender as our puppy collection view cell, and this will basically get us the index that's clicked on. So after this, we should be able to do destination dot. So there's two ways that we can handle this. We can either set every single individual property from this prepare for segue, or we can pass in an object into our collection view controller, and then on the view did load, we can set those. So that might be a better way of setting them. So we'll just do puppy objects here. and denote this as a puppy. We'll expose this actually. Alright, cool. So does anyone know why I can't actually access this puppy objects from our detail view controller? If we go into our view controller, you'll notice that puppy is distinguished inside this view controller. Right? So we actually want to pull this out of our view controller, maybe put it at the bottom, and now we should be able to access that into this file. Puppy objects. Cool. And now, yeah, so since before it was in this view controller, it was a member of this view controller. So there was no way for other classes to utilize those structs unless you do view controller dot. Well, I guess you can't even do that because it's a it's not static. So there's no way for you to actually access that struct because it's contained within the view controller. So basically, what I did here is I pulled it out outside of the class altogether. So it would be considered a global struct where you could access from anywhere. Alright, and then in our view did load, we'll just go ahead and set these properties. Dot name view dot image equal to UI image dot nip names. This will be image dot text is equal to puppy objects dot description. Cool. Alright. And then here we can do just that. So instead of having to have 3 lines here and set every single thing individually, we can just do one set on this object, which will just be our puppy array index dot. Cool. Let's see if this works. All right, there we go. So yeah, those are all of our puppies and their descriptions. Let's see. This seems to be working good. Cool. Does anyone have questions about that segue or anything like that? Crystal clear? Clear as mud? Alright, so that's pretty much what I had covered. I did have an assignment which I left a little bit of time, maybe not this much time, but it was more of an in-class activity slash your homework. So if you guys remember the last class you had with me, we made sort of this flashcard app, right? So I wanted you guys, as part of your homework, to make a flashcard app with these collection views. So instead of segueing for your homework, you'll be registering the on-click, and then on-click it'll basically switch. You'll have a front and back to these cars, and then you'll switch it. So you could change this puppy label to be the back, the puppy name, and then when you click on each of these cells, it'll flip over to show the puppy name. So it'll be like it'll be a bigger version of your flashcard app with collection views, if that makes sense. Is that clear? Clear as mud?
So each cell is a flashcard.
Yeah, every cell would be a flashcard. So think of this app, except you'll be hiding the puppy name, and you'll have that on the back side of this card.
So
Does that
when
make
you
sense?
click on that first picture, you can see puppy one.
Yep, and then when you click on it again, you'll see the image of the puppy. Or you don't have to use puppies at all. If you hate puppies, you can use something completely different. Or you can use like names of the people in class. It can be whatever design you want for the card, for the flashcard. It doesn't necessarily have to be an image view. It can just be two labels where you have a label on the front side and then another label on the back side. That's probably fine too. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And if you guys wanted to work on this in class, we can come around and help you out. So yeah, that's pretty much what I had covered. Sounds good. Or if you guys had questions about the previous assignments, we can go around and try to help you out as well. Yeah, did everyone get the networking homework done by chance? Perfect. Oh yeah, you missed that. Sure. But if you had questions about that, or if you want to start that today, we can try to help you out.
Some free time if you need to help out.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if you wanted to take a break, you go home and take the rest of the night. It's up to you guys. But yeah, we'll just stay here until 8, probably. And yeah. I'll go ahead and put all these on launch code right now, just so you guys have it to use as a reference. And stop recording.